Here is something most people managing blood sugar after 60 have never been told. Cheese, real full-fat cheese, is one of the lowest glycemic foods you can eat. It has virtually no impact on blood sugar on its own. And a growing body of research suggests that certain types of cheese, eaten in the right way and at the right time, may actively support blood sugar stability rather than threaten it. Now, I understand why this sounds surprising. For the same reason eggs got a bad reputation, dairy and cheese in particular spent decades being treated as something people with diabetes should limit or avoid because of its fat content. That guidance came from an era when all dietary fat was considered dangerous. That era is over, the science has moved on, and today I want to walk you through exactly what the current research says about 5 specific types of cheese, why each one has a different nutritional profile that matters for blood sugar, how much to eat, what to pair each one with, and what mistakes to avoid. This is not about eating unlimited cheese. This is about understanding which cheeses work with your metabolism and how to use them strategically as part of a blood sugar management approach that actually works. I'm Dr. Wells, and this is WellAge Health, honest, evidence-based health information for adults over 55 every single week. Before we go further, if you are managing diabetes with insulin or medication, please discuss dietary changes with your doctor first. Cheese is high in protein, fat, and sodium, and all 3 of those factors can interact with certain medications and medical conditions. This video is information to bring to that conversation, not a reason to skip it. Now let's talk about why cheese and blood sugar interact the way they do, because the mechanism is worth understanding. Cheese contains 3 macronutrients: protein, fat, and in most varieties, very small amounts of carbohydrate. The glycemic index of most cheese varieties is between 0 and 1. For reference, white bread sits at around 75. A glucose solution is 100. Most cheeses barely register. The reason is the absence of significant carbohydrate. Cheese is made from milk, and during the fermentation and aging process, the majority of the lactose, the milk sugar that is the carbohydrate in dairy, is broken down by bacteria into lactic acid. The longer a cheese is aged, the less lactose it retains. Hard, aged cheeses like Parmesan contain almost no lactose. Softer, fresher cheeses like cottage cheese and ricotta retain more, but even these are very low compared to any grain-based food. The protein and fat in cheese play a specific role in blood sugar management. When you eat cheese alongside or before a higher carbohydrate food, the protein slows gastric emptying. The rate at which food moves from your stomach into your small intestine, where carbohydrate digestion and glucose absorption happens. Slower gastric emptying means a flatter, more gradual blood sugar curve. Less spike, less demand on your insulin system, less stress on your pancreatic beta cells. There is also a compound in cheese and other dairy products called conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA. CLA is a naturally occurring fatty acid found in the fat of ruminant animals, cows, sheep, goats. Multiple studies have examined CLA's effect on insulin sensitivity, and several have found that higher CLA intake is associated with improved insulin receptor function, meaning cells become more responsive to insulin's signal, which is the fundamental deficit in type 2 diabetes. The research is still evolving, but the association is consistent enough across multiple studies to be worth noting. And then there is the calcium. Cheese is one of the richest dietary sources of calcium available. Calcium plays a role in insulin secretion from pancreatic beta cells. Research published in the journal Diabetes Care found that higher dietary calcium intake was associated with reduced insulin resistance in adults. This is a secondary mechanism, not the primary one, but it adds another layer to why dairy fat sources like cheese appear more metabolically favorable than their reputation would suggest. A landmark study published in the journal Diabetologia, tracking over 340,000 adults across 8 European countries, found that higher consumption of fermented dairy products, including cheese, was associated with a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The association held even after adjusting for other dietary factors, physical activity, and body weight. Fermented dairy specifically, not all dairy, showed the strongest protective association. The fermentation process is the key. During fermentation, bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids and vitamin K2, both of which have been independently studied for their effects on insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. Aged and fermented cheeses contain more of these compounds than fresh, unfermented varieties. With that foundation in place, let's go through the 5 specific cheeses that have the most relevant nutritional profiles for blood sugar management. The first is cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is unique among the cheeses on this list because it is not fermented or aged. What makes it exceptionally relevant for blood sugar management is its protein content and its specific type of protein. A standard half-cup serving of full-fat cottage cheese contains approximately 14 grams of protein and only 4 to 5 grams of carbohydrate. That protein to carbohydrate ratio is among the most favorable of any food you can eat at any meal. And the protein in cottage cheese is predominantly whey protein, the same fast-absorbing protein used in athletic supplements, along with casein, which is slower absorbing. This combination produces an extended satiety effect and a specific hormonal response that matters for diabetes. Whey protein has been shown in multiple clinical trials to stimulate the release of glucagon-like peptide 1, or GLP-1. If that name sounds familiar, it's because the most celebrated class of diabetes medications in recent years, including semaglutide, the active compound in Ozempic and Wegovy, works by mimicking GLP-1. GLP-1 slows gastric emptying, suppresses appetite, and stimulates insulin release in a glucose-dependent manner. Whey protein triggers a natural, modest version of this same response. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition gave adults with type 2 diabetes either whey protein or another protein source before a high glycemic meal. The whey group showed significantly lower post-meal blood glucose and insulin responses, a meaningful finding for people managing blood sugar daily. Cottage cheese works best as a breakfast anchor or a snack paired with berries, cucumber, tomatoes, or a small amount of nuts. 2 things to check on the label: the sodium content, which can be high in some brands, and whether the product contains added starch thickeners, which increase the carbohydrate content beyond what is naturally present. Full-fat cottage cheese is preferable to low-fat for blood sugar management. The fat slows gastric emptying. The low-fat version has a higher relative carbohydrate proportion and a faster gastric emptying rate, the opposite of what you want when you're trying to smooth out your blood sugar curve. The second cheese is feta. Feta is a brined, fermented cheese made traditionally from sheep's milk or a combination of sheep and goat milk. It has one of the most distinct nutritional profiles of any common cheese, and 2 compounds it contains are particularly relevant for adults managing blood sugar. The first is CLA. Sheep's milk contains significantly higher concentrations of conjugated linoleic acid than cow's milk. roughly 3 to 5 times higher by fat percentage. As I mentioned earlier, CLA has been studied for its effects on insulin sensitivity, and the association is favorable. Feta, because it is made from sheep or goat milk, delivers a meaningful amount of CLA per serving. The second is a compound called butyric acid. Feta contains a higher proportion of short and medium-chain fatty acids than most cows' milk cheeses. Butyric acid in particular has been studied for its effects on gut microbiome health. Research published in the journal Cell has shown that gut microbiome composition directly influences insulin sensitivity and systemic inflammation, two of the primary drivers of type 2 diabetes progression. Foods that support a healthy microbiome have indirect but real effects on metabolic health. Feta is also lower in calories than most cheeses and has a strong flavor, which means a small amount goes a long way. 1 ounce, about 28 grams, provides approximately 75 calories, 4 grams of protein, 6 grams of fat, and less than 1 gram of carbohydrate. It is one of the most efficient ways to add protein and beneficial fatty acids to a meal without significantly increasing carbohydrate or caloric load. The best pairings for feta from a blood sugar perspective are Mediterranean-style chopped cucumber, tomatoes, olives, olive oil, and a small amount of whole grain bread or no bread at all. This combination consistently produces low glycemic responses in research and provides anti-inflammatory compounds from multiple sources. The sodium in feta is worth noting. It typically runs between 300 and 400 milligrams per ounce. For adults managing blood pressure alongside diabetes, portion awareness matters here. The third cheese is ricotta. Ricotta occupies an interesting position in dairy nutrition because it is technically not a cheese in the traditional sense. It's made from whey, the liquid byproduct of cheese making. When other cheeses are produced, the whey is drained off, and ricotta is made by heating that whey and collecting the proteins that rise to the surface. This means ricotta is exceptionally high in whey protein, the same fast-absorbing protein we discussed in the context of cottage cheese and GLP-1 stimulation. A quarter-cup serving of whole milk ricotta contains approximately 7 grams of protein, 6 grams of fat, and 3 to 4 grams of carbohydrate. The protein-to-carbohydrate ratio is favorable for blood sugar management, and the fat content helps slow gastric emptying in the same way as other full-fat dairy. Ricotta is lower in sodium than feta and parmesan, typically around 40 to 60 milligrams per quarter cup, which makes it a useful option for adults who need to be careful about sodium intake. The practical application of ricotta in a blood sugar management context is as a protein-rich base that can replace higher carbohydrate ingredients. Ricotta on whole grain toast instead of butter. Ricotta in scrambled eggs to increase protein content. Ricotta with berries as a dessert that provides sweetness without a significant glucose spike. Ricotta as a savory dip with vegetables instead of hummus or high-sodium dips that contain added sugars. One important label check for ricotta: many commercial ricotta products contain added stabilizers and a small amount of guar gum or other thickeners. These don't significantly affect blood sugar, but the cleanest options are ricotta with the fewest added ingredients, ideally just whey, whole milk, vinegar or lemon juice, and salt. The fourth cheese is aged Parmesan. Parmesan, specifically genuine Parmigiano Reggiano aged for 12 months or longer, is one of the most nutritionally concentrated cheeses available. And from a blood sugar management perspective, it has 2 standout characteristics. The first is that it contains virtually no lactose. The 18-plus month aging process typical of authentic Parmesan allows bacteria to completely break down essentially all of the milk sugar. For adults over 60 who have developed lactose sensitivity, which becomes more common with age as lactase enzyme production declines, Parmesan is typically extremely well tolerated. This matters not just for digestive comfort, but because lactose intolerance can lead people to avoid dairy entirely, which removes the metabolic benefits of the protein and fat. The second characteristic is protein density. 1 ounce of Parmesan contains approximately 10 grams of protein, higher than most cheeses of the same serving size. Because Parmesan has a very intense flavor, most people use it in small amounts, shaved, grated, or crumbled, which means you get a significant protein hit from what feels like a modest addition to a meal. Parmesan is also exceptionally rich in calcium, approximately 335 milligrams per ounce, roughly a third of the daily recommended intake for adults over 60. Given the relationship between dietary calcium and insulin secretion that I mentioned earlier, this is a meaningful contribution from a relatively small serving. The best way to use Parmesan for blood sugar management is as a flavor amplifier and protein booster on otherwise low glycemic meals, shaved over a salad of dark leafy greens with olive oil and walnuts, grated into eggs, added to roasted vegetables. The flavor intensity means a small amount does a lot of work, which keeps the sodium, caloric, and saturated fat contribution manageable. The one caution with Parmesan is sodium. Authentic Parmesan typically contains around 450 milligrams of sodium per ounce, the highest of the 5 cheeses we're covering today. If you are managing hypertension alongside diabetes, which is extremely common, Parmesan should be used in small amounts as a flavoring rather than as a primary protein source. The 5th cheese is Gouda, specifically aged Gouda. Aged Gouda is one of the least discussed but most nutritionally interesting cheeses for metabolic health, and the reason comes down to a specific nutrient called vitamin K2. Vitamin K2 is found in fermented foods and in the fat of ruminant animals. Aged Gouda, particularly varieties aged for 12 months or longer, is one of the richest dietary sources of vitamin K2 in the form called MK7, which is the most bioavailable form. Why does vitamin K2 matter for blood sugar? A growing body of research suggests that vitamin K2 plays a direct role in insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. A study published in the journal Diabetes Care found that higher dietary vitamin K2 intake was associated with a significantly lower risk of type 2 diabetes in a large prospective cohort. A separate intervention study published in Diabetes and Metabolism found that vitamin K2 supplementation improved insulin sensitivity in adults who were insulin resistant. The mechanism appears to involve vitamin K2's role in activating a protein called osteocalcin, which is produced by bone cells and has been shown in animal and human studies to function as a metabolic hormone, stimulating insulin secretion from the pancreas and improving insulin sensitivity in peripheral tissues. Aged Gouda is also high in protein, approximately 7 grams per ounce. And like Parmesan, the aging process significantly reduces lactose content. It has a rich caramel-like flavor that makes it satisfying in small amounts, and it pairs well with walnuts, apple slices in controlled portions, or as part of a cheese and vegetable snack plate. 1 ounce of aged Gouda contains approximately 100 calories, 7 grams of fat, 7 grams of protein, and less than 1 gram of carbohydrate. For a food with this nutritional profile, it delivers exceptional satiety, Most people find that 1 to 1.5 ounces of aged Gouda with some raw vegetables and a handful of nuts makes a satisfying blood sugar neutral snack that holds them for 3 to 4 hours. Now, here is what I want you to take from everything I've shared. Cheese is not a treatment for diabetes. It is a food with a specific nutritional profile that, when chosen carefully and incorporated thoughtfully, works with your blood sugar rather than against it. The mistakes people make with cheese and blood sugar are predictable and avoidable. The first mistake is pairing cheese with high glycemic carbohydrates and expecting the cheese to neutralize the spike. Crackers with cheese, white bread with cheese, processed cheese on a white bread sandwich. The cheese helps. It does slow gastric emptying and reduce the peak glucose response, but it cannot cancel out a large glycemic load on its own. The best pairings are vegetables, nuts, eggs, or small amounts of high-fiber carbohydrates. The second mistake is choosing processed cheese products. Individually wrapped slices, spray cheese, cheese-flavored products instead of real cheese. Processed cheese products often contain added starches, maltodextrin, and other carbohydrate-based stabilizers that do raise blood sugar. Real cheese, actual fermented or aged dairy, is what the research is about. Read the ingredient list. If you see starch, maltodextrin, or modified food starch in the first several ingredients, that is a processed cheese product, not real cheese. The third mistake is eating too much at once. Even with a glycemic index of 0, cheese is calorie dense. For weight management, which is one of the most powerful interventions available for type 2 diabetes, portion control matters. 1 to 1.5 ounces per serving is the amount most consistent with the research showing metabolic benefits. Here is your practical action plan for this week. Step 1. Add one of the 5 cheeses we discussed to one meal or snack each day this week. Start with whichever one you already enjoy or have easiest access to. Cottage cheese at breakfast, feta on a salad at lunch, ricotta as an afternoon snack with berries, a small amount of parmesan on roasted vegetables at dinner, a portion of aged Gouda with cucumber and walnuts as an evening snack. Step 2. Check your blood sugar 2 hours after the meal or snack where you added cheese. Track it for 2 weeks. Most people managing blood sugar at home are surprised to see how stable their post-meal readings are when protein and fat anchor the meal instead of carbohydrates. Step 3. Replace one high-carbohydrate snack with a cheese-based snack this week. If you're currently eating crackers, a granola bar, or a piece of fruit on its own as a mid-morning or mid-afternoon snack, replace it once with cottage cheese and cucumber, or feta and cherry tomatoes, or ricotta with a small handful of walnuts. Compare how you feel 2 hours later, both in terms of your blood sugar readings and your hunger level. Step 4. Check your sodium if you have high blood pressure. Feta and parmesan are highest in sodium. Ricotta and cottage cheese are lower. If sodium is a concern, gravitate toward the lower sodium options and be aware of total daily intake. Step 5. Speak with your doctor or a registered dietitian if you have kidney disease. Higher protein intake affects kidney filtration rate, and cheese is a protein-dense food. This is a conversation to have before significantly increasing your dairy protein intake if your kidney function has been flagged. The 5 cheeses we covered today, cottage cheese, feta, ricotta, parmesan, and aged Gouda, each bring a different combination of protein, fat, calcium, CLA, vitamin K2, and whey protein to the table. They each have different practical uses, and they each have genuine, research-supported reasons to be part of a blood sugar management approach for adults over 60 who want to eat satisfying, flavorful food without paying for it with a glucose spike. You do not have to eat a bland diet to manage your blood sugar well. You just have to understand how food works. And now you do. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe. I cover topics exactly like this every single week. Leave a comment and tell me which of these 5 cheeses is your favorite, or which one surprised you most. I read every comment, and your response helps me understand what this community needs from me next.